So we are already 2 minutes after. Let's, I think Lead be joining quite late. Ellen is not in the meeting yet. Naveen, would you mind if we start from your topic? Okay, Lee is here, so probably.
Oh, very good. Oh, good. Well, we're up to the first topic already. I thought you were. All right, very good. So, let's jump in. There is two considerations around the seeding of content in providers. So Ashish is with us. Good. He's done a fair bit of work here on the local provider. And so, yeah, if Utkarsh, if you don't mind, if you open up that design spec, or I can share if it's more convenient, either way. There is, can you do me a favor and that related box, the gray table at the top, there, yep, it's got a link in there. Yeah, if you would go to that link as well. Okay, so so we have two, different types of providers with Measurectl, and so this doc is talking about the local provider and how the local provider deals with content and how to get that content to users quickly. And we want to do that because so that way users can, the time to value in using Measurectl is fast. Like it comes with this seed, it comes with content that is pre-seeded. Now there are two types, just as a refresher for all of us who've looked at this in the past or who haven't looked at it yet. There's more or less what we consider two types of content. I'm sorry, there's three types of content. Patterns, service mesh patterns, WebAssembly filters, and Kubernetes applications. Of those three types, those can be produced by either individual users who go to import that content, or produced by the provider or by the community. And so user produced or provider produced. So in the event of provider produced content, which is to say the provider produced content that we have today is primarily it comes in three forms. So we said filters, patterns, applications, but where those three forms are located, where they're stored is GitHub, or individual GitHub repos. So for WebAssembly filters, it's WASM filters. Service mesh patterns, there's service mesh patterns repo. And then the applications as we have them under MeshOps v1, which is to say the non-pattern format. These applications are stored in each individual Measurectl adapter. And that is because historically, it's been because the adapters have been considered a delivery mechanism of a vehicle for delivering things like sample apps. The apps have been, sometimes there's specific service mesh, specific consideration that needs to be done for when you deploy an app. As we move forward, I wonder if that will continue to be the case, if we will continue to have, certainly individual service meshes function differently and will need to have different considerations made as you onboard an app. But I wonder if the application descriptor, the Kubernetes manifest, I wonder if that continues to need to be bundled with the adapter, or if we can move those to a provider, like to Measurectl server, to the local provider, to the remote provider. So who can help me think this through? For Ashish and Utkarsh, like as we, as we go to import, as a user imports an application, a manifest, that gets converted into a pattern format, but it gets stored in Mesh server. When someone later goes to, or the user goes to use that application and deploy it to a particular service mesh, any service mesh specific considerations are addressed at the time of when the operation was invoked. Those considerations are addressed by the adapter for the service mesh that the user is using. If that's the case, like, do we need to continue to bundle sample apps with, or not just sample apps, but then ongoing applications with mesh adapters?
Actually, one of the advantage of keeping these applications, sample application or any application with adapters is that basically that case where adapter is not present while that particular, so let's say our application relies on a component which depends on is the adapter. So Mesh server needs is the adapter to perform that operation. It has that listed in there. You would try to invoke that operation. Obviously, nothing would go wrong in the infrastructure because we have designed stuff like that. We will stop the operation beforehand because we know that that thing is not available. But if you would keep these sample apps or any application in the adapters, then if the adapter is not present, then there is no registration. If there is no registration, we don't show that thing to the user. That's actually one of the advantage. The disadvantage is that we'll have to build something new in adapters just so that they can start registering even these kind of objects or constructs. That's a disadvantage to doing it in adapter.
Yep. So it's a better user, currently it's a better user experience when the applications are bundled with an adapter. Because, yep, that makes sense.
I think last time when we had a discussion about this, one of the considerations were that we package this with the server, and when the adapters register their capabilities at the server side, we know that these are basically the applications that we have, and these are the applications that we can actually deploy or support. So one point of discussion was, what if we show all of them to the user, but we gray out the ones that we cannot support? So we have basically like Utkarsh said, adapter tells the Mesh server that these are the registered, these are the things that I can handle. So server can differentiate between two types of applications, the one it has and the one it can support. Or
Yeah, that's good. So you took the words out of my mouth. So like, the question becomes, how much of an effort is that, and how confident are we about that? We should be pretty confident about the ability to determine whether or not a given application is operable at the moment that someone requests the list of applications. We should be able to invoke the same DAG or the same prerequisite.
Actually, now Mesh server has dry run built into it, so you can dry run your pattern. It won't do anything in your infrastructure. It will just check if that pattern will actually go through. So probably we can just use that to gray out stuff that this pattern is not going to go through. Yeah.
And then, yeah, it'd be nice to, a little bit of that sounds pretty good. There's a bit that concerns me that it's just more refactoring for us, whereas users don't really care. Or, I mean, which is to say, like, we're building a better internal system. Ultimately, like, yeah, this does have a direct user experience. It is nice, but what I mean to say is, yeah, it'll be a little bit of effort, and it's just refactoring. The refactoring being to stop shipping sample apps in patterns and to start doing it centrally. The refactoring can be helpful, though, in reducing sustaining costs potentially by dealing with applications basically in the same way that we're dealing with the other types of content. Hold on to that thought. There's a consideration a little bit later that I think has an effect on where we're loading patterns for applications from. So for now, okay, good. So good. This is a helpful refresher. This is the content that's there in the local provider. It's the files are bundled into the image, the container image. When the server boots, it does a boot, an initialization process to source the files, source the content. So the actual storage of the files and getting them into a place that's available, that's one consideration, and that's separate from the routine of automating the import. So bear that in mind. Now, the nice thing about building that content into the container image for the local provider, that helps with air gap deployments, because that content is just present and available. For the remote provider, that we'll talk about that in a minute. We do want to be concerned with versioning the content. Ultimately, if people make changes to a pattern and they want to keep an older version of it or an older version of their filter, we want to eventually facilitate for that. Okay, so that's the state of the local provider, content that's seated in the local provider today. If we go over to the other doc for the remote provider, and if we skip over the sequence diagram for the moment, there's a couple of considerations. So the remote provider is deployed separately. The proposal here is that, that Measurectl will fetch new content as new content becomes available. That the way that Measurectl would come to understand that new content is available is through GitHub Workflow that's triggered by a release event. So if the service mesh patterns repo, the WASM filters repo, if those trigger a notification to Measurectl, the Measurectl can reach out and perform its import routine. That's not the only way to notify. And so when we talk about potentially moving applications around, moving where they sit around, some of those, a number of those applications, we're not going to go out and create triggers on Istio's book info repo to have that repo notify Measurectl that there's a new version available. I don't think that that's necessary, though, right? Measurectl could poll. So think about this as we walk through this. So right now, we're also kind of relying upon the sources of content being in GitHub, but this is for seed content, and that's probably okay because users can import from wherever they want to anyway. The provider does need, ideally determines whether or not content is novel. We don't want to have a bunch of duplicative listings of the same filters like 10 times over. Rather, as content is imported, whether it's seed content or otherwise, there's some pseudocode there about whether or not Measurectl would need to determine, is this a new file or is this the same file that I already have? And so it would use, the proposal is that it would use kind of two things to determine this. It would use the location of the file, and look to its database and determine if it doesn't have a file at that location, then this is considered a new file. To figure out if it's the same piece of content and it's the same version, then it would use the location. If it finds a matching location of a pre-existing record, then it would look to that file's git SHA. And if it's the same git SHA, then it's a duplicative piece of content. Don't import it. Don't do anything. Doesn't need to. It already has that file. If it's the same location, but there's a new git SHA, then it's the same. It's just a new version of the existing piece of content. The action would be to update the record. Later on, we would support maybe inserting a new record to support versioning of content.
So because we are relying on git SHA, that means that we would be only importing from GitHub or any remote Git repository.
Right. Yep. And so that it doesn't work for users importing from a file system. So users importing from a file system, yeah, if they're doing it at the same local path, then maybe they wouldn't get duplicative content. If they're, and so hashing instead of doing it using the git SHA might be a better determinant of whether or not this is the same file or is it different, a different file. A new version of, I'm sorry, whether or not this is the same file or a different version of the same file. Because yeah, even then, like, this isn't foolproof. It's like, well, if a user imports a piece of content from their documents folder and then just moves that piece of content to their desktop and imports from there, it's like, oh, that looks like a new file. And because it's at a new location, a new local path location. And so it will be treated as such. And I think that that's reasonable generally. If it's the same hash, MD5, then it wouldn't be, it would be versioned as such. So this is a little bit of a brain tease, some of these questions. So good to introduce on the call. Maybe we wouldn't make it to the end. Part of what,
yeah, actually, so just one thing that is, if the content that we are going to import, we also had plans to enforce pattern ID. So we can use, just like npm registry or git tags, if this doesn't changes, then it's not an, if you change this, then we consider it as an update. If you don't, then we don't consider it as an update, and we refuse to basically update that thing. So probably this is something that we can use without going down the path git SHA or SHA.
Yeah, which works well for, when we think about applications and filters, though, binaries. Yeah.
Right.
So one other area of concern for Measurectl is ownership and access. In the local provider, it's just assumed that everyone has, the user has access to everything. In Measurectl, there'll be ownership and access concerns. And so that's probably good for us to review, or that proposal isn't written up yet, so probably good to review later. But I think this is a healthy review. This is a good step forward, a little bit different than what was proposed previously. The current proposal, I think, comes with some caveats. So one, it's kind of tied to GitHub at the moment, like Git, which it's probably not good. Two, it's kind of tied. It's tied to that for both versioning and also for notification of when there's a new piece of content. And so now, granted, we are just talking about seed content. So we should clarify that when we say, well, a user might import a new piece of content, it's like, yes. Is that of a concern in this discussion? Well, yeah, it is, because to the extent that you use the same routines for importing seed content versus content later on, you'd want to use the same routines or portions of the same routines. And so, yeah, this isn't just, the focus is seed content, but we need to account for other, user imported content. The focus is provider produced content versus user produced, but user produced is in scope of what's being discussed here. So this is good. So I think that with this discussion, I know that there's 3 or more of you on the call who will have comments and things to iterate on to help advance the thought. Ashish, I would like to see what it would take to do that, invoke that dry run, to basically augment the behavior of the read, like the endpoint for reading an application, for reading a pattern. Those two minimally, like the read action would need to be updated to include the dry run, a dry run assessment, so that when we go to display that content in the UI, a flag can be set to let people know that this is available in your system, but it's operationally dysfunctional, or it's available in your system and you can go ahead and deploy it.
One more thing probably we can consider is that because dry running is very cheap, it takes few milliseconds, very few. So just when stuff comes onto the UI, hit the and also we ensure that at max you would be able to access only 25 items. So that's also one thing. So you can just quickly hit the endpoint 25 times maybe and gray out just right there. So it won't actually take. It will take a minimum amount of code in the front end side, and the backend can stay as it is.
Yeah. The thing about it is, yep. I mean, I don't know why what the justification for doing that versus doing it back end where you don't make all those calls and all you're doing is annotating whether or not it's available or not. Is that
actually because we register thousands of components, so basically it would be event based. So if there are thousands of components, every time something new gets registered, we are anyhow running dry run to see if now that particular file is valid or not. So it would be far more calls as compared to doing it only when the user actually needs it. So sort of doing it in a lazy way, because actually the component gets registered are way too many.
Yeah, well, no, what I mean is like when someone does a read to pull up they do a read on the endpoint to pull up 25 records of the path. Yes, we were actually saying almost the same thing, except I was saying just do it just prior to displaying it in the back end. Ashish, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Seems, yeah, I mean, that's a good UX improvement all around, irrespective of the question about where applications are sourced from. Any other comments on this topic before we go to the next? Yeah. Okay. Nice. So Alan,
Before we move on, should I create an issue or a ClickUp task regarding this extra dry run thing?
Yeah, if you would, please. Yeah, an issue would be great.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next item. Alan, if you want to talk about wasm filters catalog.
Cool. And that question was for Alan. So Alan, if you're on, your topic is up.
If you're having issue with your audio, you can probably let us know in the chat. Let's move on to the next item. So Alan fixes his audio issue. I think probably that's the issue. So Navindu, I think you are up.
Yep. Thank you, Utkarsh. So this topic is on updating filters UI to support binary plus configuration apply. So I guess me and Utkarsh discussed about this a bit, and one of the fixes for this was made in the Measurectl provider, and the PR is linked there. And yeah, and we just wanted to point out the areas that we need to work on. So from a high level, we need to add support for persisting filter configuration, and as like with the discussion with Utkarsh, as Utkarsh mentions in that particular PR, we can handle the filter configuration with the WASM binary itself. So yeah, that is one thing that we have decided, and we also have an endpoint in Measurectl server currently that serves the filter file. So one of the another issue here is that this file, like if we are behind a provider, then it will be behind a layer of authentication. So we need to make sure that the Envoy VM can actually pull these WASM files that is stored in Measurectl. So that is a concern, and I guess like we have to decide, we have to look into how we can handle it. Yep. So I just wanted to address these concerns as we go on to add configuration for WASM filters in Measurectl. And Utkarsh, anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, just I think we are already good with. So actually, Navindu today fixed we had some issue with uploading. Actually, it was working, but we had some internal issues with uploading binaries. Navindu actually today fixed it in Measurectl. So now that's done. I and Lee were on call and we discussed about how we can actually go about persisting config files along with WASM binaries. And I think we sort of concluded that right now what we do is we actually persist just WASM binaries in our cloud or in any provider. Alongside that, we can actually start persisting config files as well for that particular binary, and this will act as a default. This will act as default values for that particular filter, which would be overridable probably in the UI. So this was one of the things that we actually discussed earlier. The thing that Navindu was talking about, the authorization issue, the ODC issue that we would actually face. Right now we have, if you are uploading your content to a provider, it's behind an authorization wall so that only the uploader can actually access it. We also have concept for infinite tokens, infinite lifetime tokens, but they are sort of restricted. Only certain accounts can actually create them or destroy them. So this is a concern that we have to probably deal with in the future. Because what we need actually is the ability to create endpoints which are accessible for the user, but this endpoint would be actually accessed on behalf of user by Envoy VM. And actually, if it's Istio is the one which is actually going to make the call. Envoy passes it on to Istio. So basically, we need a construct which allows to do that. This is a concern that we have to deal with. So that's actually pretty much it. We, as I think Lee also talked about it a bit earlier, right now we don't have a specification as such written. This is something that we are still considering.
Yeah, if you would go back to the having a separate file for config. Speak a bit more to that as a refresher of my memory, and then what you think the UX would be like. Yeah, someone goes to either do it from Measurectl or maybe from the UI.
Okay, actually, okay. So just for a refresher, actually, what we discussed was about the providers, not exactly the client, but we sort of also talked about how probably the UX could be like. It was that the default config, the config file, the filter file, along with WASM would be stored on provider. In terms of a UI, what we can do is the edit button that you were actually talking about, we talked about on the call also, that instead of right now, if anyone remembers on the call, we demoed it previous week, it was allowing you to edit, but the binary, which probably you don't want to edit, you want to edit the file, and that's what you'd be able to edit. This is the file which is actually attached to the WASM binary and saved alongside that particular binary in the provider. It could be Measurectl, it could be a Measurectl server. So yeah, that's sort of the UX that's a limit of the UX we actually talked about.
Okay, got you. So if we, it might be the case that Measurectl would need an additional parameter to allow someone to specify their binary and then also specify their config file. Thanks, that was my question.
Yeah, yes, I guess so. Yeah. Or like in the configuration file, like we actually point to the URL of the WASM binary that is stored in Measurectl server.
Yeah, with respect to the public URL, or with respect to the other concern about like the Istio control plane being able to get to the binary, that makes sense.
Actually, local reference is also something that we, this is something also we have to discuss, and probably that's what Navindu was also reaching to, and that is what we want is that if you are dealing with Measurectl as content manager, then what you should be able to do is just refer a unique identifier of your content, and Measurectl would be able to figure it out. I think that's what Navindu was also talking about. So,
which is to say that,
yeah, go ahead.
That if you're referring to that particular content, in this case the filter, that you'd specify its ID in your query string, and Measurectl server would determine whether or not you're a Measurectl UI user or a Measurectl user, and respond to you accordingly with a local reference versus something separate. Maybe, although we'll probably get ourselves in a, like, that would work for the UI kind of right now, only because it's bundled into Measurectl server. It's not just because it's bundled in, like you could also base it on authentication or authorization of whether or not the user is also passing along a JOT. So for Measurectl and Measureui, like using a JOT-based determination of that or a token-based determination of that would probably work, and there would be some nice intelligence there. Although sometimes people are going to want to like retrieve that public-facing URL anyway, for whatever reason. So yeah, we're probably like the thing is like this doing that also negates, and currently we don't support it, but it also negates the ability to import a filter, but really just import the record of it, not the actual binary, so that the record of it can be there even though it's pointing to a remotely persisted filter. Right now, that's not something that we support, and maybe it's not something that we would never support. But so I don't know, being clever there may not help us, like adding another attribute called PublicUrl, while simpler, it might just, we might, yeah, I think Rudrock was saying in the past that I've said we're trying to be too smart in some areas. And so we get ourselves into trouble. And this might be one of those examples of like.
Let's move on to the next slide. And I think it's from Abhishek.
Yeah. So UX for filters UI handling WebAssembly plus config, right? So I haven't worked on this item yet. I'm actually working on test and upload deletion, like CRUD operation for patterns with Cypress. So, probably second one. So I just learned Cypress and kind of going good through it. So yeah, that's what my update is.
Say it again. I didn't understand.
So I just started learning Cypress and is testing upload like CRUD operation with the patterns only right now. That's what I was saying.
Oh, nice. Yeah, good.
Yeah. So Mario is also there, like yeah, so probably we are doing it together. So I just had no knowledge about Cypress, that's why I was learning and testing of things.
So the state of that particular test is what, like an open PR or just still code on your local system?
So it's a code in my local system, no open PR, but hoping to open it by tomorrow. So it's not for WASM filters, actually it's for patterns, is what I'm working on right now. Okay. Like yeah, so on a window added, like any of the configuration pattern filters or applications can be tested. So I just started with patterns, since most of the things are like yeah, having good functionality, like all the buttons are, as expected. So for that reason.
Mario, does this, have you given much thought in this area? I know it hasn't been long since we last spoke about it, but does what Abhi is saying ring a bell?
Yes, sure. So currently, recently I finished setting my local environment. So I'm taking a look specifically at the configuring, these, there's a guide for this functionality. So I'm just going over it to see, to get more familiar with what's the expected condition. So we upload a file and it uploads fine, right? So I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't see a lot of difference between, like, at least on the test perspective, adding a pattern versus adding a filter versus adding an application. I'm going to do some actual, using the UI, both manually and with Cypress, to inspect, if there's specific requests, and what I see about the issue is that we're expected to do integration tests. So just to clarify, this means that the test would, we would make Cypress intercept requests to the backend, and we need to mark or not only intercept to listen to them, but also to supply like specific payload, like that's part of the integration, like testing we do at this level. There are end-to-end tests, but at least in the issue, I don't see this is included. Is this correct? Like, I mean, we only want to test the integration, like only the front end, correct?
Yeah, I think for the I think as a good starting point, yeah, I think for the moment that, like, if the integration test that's being performed is to upload a file, then you're about right that that it would be just testing the UI. I mean, it'd be testing the UI and the Measurectl server, but that it is possible for people. Yeah. It's possible for users to use the CLI, Measurectl to also import a content, a filter or a pattern. But in terms of Cypress, by the way, does Cypress, like, I'm assuming that's not a great fit for Cypress as a tool. Is that right?
In what? I mean, when you say it's not a good fit, do you mean a specific area like CLI, like going on, like using the CLI? Well, not by default. Of course, there's a certain task we can we can invoke specific code that will run in a node environment. So we would need to configure that, of course. It's part of, like, Cypress functionality. Either there's something that we need to configure, like, before running the test, or we need to invoke, like, an OS level piece of code, maybe something we need to trigger, and it's not, like, from the UI. There are ways of doing that. They're not straightforward, because the tools are different, and Cypress exposes different ways of doing that. So it would be good to do that if we would want to test a combination of CLI and UI. Like, okay, let's say a user, I'm just giving an example over here, thin air, user uses CLI, updates a specific pattern, and then maybe he configures it in a certain way, and then right after that, then he or she goes to the UI and does something else, right, with that data. So maybe those kind of scenarios would be like good to pursue once we cover, like, basic functionality, right?
Nice. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, I think part of when I was asking you that question, I was not expanding my mind to really think about
those scenarios.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, the end-to-end integration tests are being invoked inside of a GitHub workflow. And so, yeah, to your point, if the high-level description of a test might be, verify import of a filter like of a piece of content, and that that workflow, the GitHub workflow might be called that, but internal to it, it might have two different jobs using two different clients, one client being CLI based and the other client being UI based. And so to your point, like over time, while we're focused on the Measurectl UI as the client in context of Cypress, and we want to start there and be successful there and have, write any number of, integration tests that as we come back to integration, we've done a lot of unit testing with Measurectl, but as we come back to integration testing, yeah, it'll be an interesting reflection. Like, hey, would we go and augment the existing workflow for the integration test with the UI client and add the CLI client as like a second parallel job? Or would we, split, have two separate workflows that are really testing the same feature, but from two different types of clients? Like, yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, it's something we don't have to figure out now, but it's just a good.
Yeah, of course, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I'd like to pursue that once we cover the basics, and I'd like to add something else. So when we do Cypress Test, it's if we are, let's say, talking about me, and let's say I'm in a team and we're developing a specific set of functionality. As a tester, when we have a technical, let's say we're doing this white box testing, we know like what's being developed as it is developed. We do early testing. We go over. Sorry, my daughter. We go over the design. We go over the pull request and etc. We try to test. We script our test in a way that we're very well aware of what we're testing, like what piece of integration part we're testing. This time around, like this is another circumstance where something's already developed. We come in and as testers. So even though we're going to do integration tests, what I do usually is that I start the script. I add the first step so that the test navigates to Cypress, and then so Cypress, I'm not sure if everyone's aware. It has like this like UI as a test runner. So it's very, very interesting because that it allows you to inspect and to go over the what's happening inside the console, and if there's any request being ran, just go in the network tab in the browser, and then so I would start looking at what's happening in the browser, and then start adding these intercept commands so that we can, of course, the upload of the file needs to be like a real file, but or else there are also some strategies. So we can add like a blob file. That means it's just in memory, and then all of what I'm saying, this is all in the Cypress recipes, and maybe this is like to more for Abhishek. He's learning Cypress, so I'll share with you like those links. So there's some recipes, and it's just like going over a catalog, seeing if there's a specific recipe for your use case. You're trying to do an upload, you're trying to do some specific user actions, and I'll take a look to let's say the drawbacks of each different approach. But we could definitely use like an in-memory file and just pass like this a reference. But everything, all of this, let me just take a look, because everything depends on the implementation of how the UI, how is the front end uploading. Oh yeah. Okay, so I don't know who's sharing the screen. Oh yeah, that's Abhishek. Yeah, cool. So he's sharing the test runner. Okay, cool. Yep. So the idea is that I need to take a look as to how is the front end supporting the upload, and then I'll based on the implementation, I'll take a look as to how we can make Cypress either do an actual upload, or at least like use a blob in memory and then just pass it to the application, but I'm barely taking a look at the functionality, so sorry for not being able to show any code yet, but I'll do my best this week to get some progress, and try to find a strategy we can reuse across the different tests for this functional area. So that's all I wanted to share.
Nice. Yeah, progress with getting your local development environment set up, and then actually just good for everyone here to be aware of what you're saying about, there might be certain times where the particular environment that the runner is in, maybe just a random, like maybe there isn't a filter available. So you can tell Cypress, like, so you could use an in-memory block with Cypress to not have an actual file, but to like perform the test anyway, and so sometimes that's really fantastic and that's what you need. Other times it comes with the caveat of like, well, like if there was a continuation of that integration test that needed an actual file, then maybe you'd have a challenge, but it's just, I think as you share that aloud, really good for everyone to be aware of, of its capabilities. Also, to your point.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and then to your point, I think you were alluding to potential reuse in the future as well over, like hey, here's a lot of the
code.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I like to add that. Thanks. Sorry for interrupting. I'd like to add that. I was a Selenium WebDriver tester with C# in the past, and I switched over to Cypress. For me, it was very, I don't know, I felt it was very risky to, mock things up and, use certain stuff in test code, because that's not like a common to do, but I really like the vision and how the Cypress team, the creators of the tool, they share that, even though, if you know your application, it's very safe to use like, let's say, test version dependencies or components or data in your environment, right? Because you need to have control of your test, else it's very complicated. I've experienced that, like everything starts to fail intermittently. You don't know, like you don't trust your test because they might fail just because, and it takes time to debug just to find like certain intermittent issues. And when you start working with this tool, what I like is that it helps you be more conscious of how your application works. How is it exposed in a certain set of functionality? And so that's what I wanted to share. And I'll let you guys know any blockers or issues or questions that I have, and I'll try to collaborate with Abhishek as best as I can. I'm sure he has, even though he's new in Cypress, I'm sure he has a lot of value to add to this task. So thanks a lot.
Nice.
Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
So let's move on to the next item, which is from me. It is about defining relationship between application, pattern, and filter. This is something I think we talked about last week also, not in detail, and probably today also not in much detail. I quickly created, this looks ugly, that's because I created in the last 5 minutes. So this is just a broad overview of what the relationship actually looks like. So pattern is, as we were talking about, it's a very broad term. It's about best practices, enforcing best practices, letting you know about best practices, along with, because it's a very generic construct, it lets you do everything with your infrastructure. And when we say everything, it's actually everything. You can configure your service meshes, you can configure your cluster, you can create resources, you can basically anything that you can probably imagine, that's right now supported with patterns. Except exception is ODC, like setting up something like Spire or something. That's probably something we would take up later. One of the construct that pattern supports is, and when I say pattern supports, that's most like the file, the way patterns are structured, the pattern file that we have, they are capable of representing filters. What filters are? Filters are basically WASM binary, along with a config file. This config file is a file, YAML, as everything is in Kubernetes world, where you can actually talk about, not talk about, you can actually specify how your WASM file is supposed to configured on the envoy data plane. Where should it be dropped, or what should be its position in filter chain, and what should be the other details, like where should it be fetched from, what the SHA should look like, and those kind of details. This is something that this config file is going to capture. This config file is again a pattern file, not and when I say again pattern file, it's about a YAML file, which is capable of representing almost anything that you want to perform on your cluster. The second concept is application, that is also sort of comes under patterns. It's another construct. What it is basically, it's a construct which lets you handle your workloads in a cluster. This workload could be a Kubernetes manifest. If you have Kubernetes manifest, of course, you can do kubectl apply. Or what you can do is you can convert into patterns. Well, why would you want to convert into pattern file? Because you can import into Measurectl. Why would you want to import in Measurectl? Because we have a extension mesh map. You can actually visualize whatever you had in a manifest in your infrastructure, and you can actually design it further from there graphically, basically with a nice user interface. I don't have mesh map up, or I would have showed you. The second thing is rollouts. That's also something that we support today. And the support is sort of limited. We definitely want to, we would be actually extending the support. But what you can do is just using the same application construct, you can do canary rollouts, or canary rollouts is something that we sort of support. You can also do blue-green deployments or those kind of things, which is also sort of a subset of application. And this ... which like my poor designing skills, actually that basically means others. We can also support other methods of handling your workloads. So basically that's what mostly patterns is. It's a huge construct which allows you to represent anything in a YAML file, anything that you want to perform on your cluster, on your infrastructure. Along with enforcement of best practices. How best practices are enforced is basically via, actually right now via official patterns that actually we talked a lot about today: seeding patterns, seeding applications, seeding filters. Those are official things. They actually enforce the best practices. So let's say we have a filter for rate limiting. We are going to provide, we are going to seed it for you. You can actually drop it in your data plane. You can use that, and probably trust us that that is going to work just right. And it is basically, it is the best configuration probably you can ask for, or you can actually tweak it. We also provide tweaking the rate limiting or the rest of the WASM filters that we have. So this is basically the overview of what patterns is. I hope it made sense. If it didn't, you can ask questions.
Okay, yeah, so there is any application that is like available, and you just impose a pattern file onto it to perform, to make it best, or to make those performance like
So right
And
now, right now, actually, so right now, this is one thing that is, if you are the capability to convert, transpose Kubernetes into mesh-free applications that was added very recently. So that's not the place where we actually, right now at least, enforcing best practices. But what you can actually do is if you use type colon application, if you have seen that construct in mesh-free. Let me try to pull up patterns. Yeah. So if you have seen that application construct that we have, that actually already enforces best practices. So let's say this one. Here, what we are trying to do is actually deploy our application called details. This is its image, and it looks sort of like you are trying to deploy a pod, but it's not exactly a pod. It's not even a deployment. It's not replica set. It creates multiple stuff. It will actually first check if you have a proper rollout engine available in your infrastructure or not. If it's not there, it's going to basically pull it up for you. And once it is up and running, it's going to create a rollout for you, and then a replica set, then pod, and then basically it's going to set up stuff for you. At the same time, it's also going to ensure that you when you say that, okay, I want to access this on 9080, it should be accessible to you on 9080, unless and until like you have very weird networking things set up in your infrastructure and cannot figure out that how to get it up for you. So basically, if you are using this construct, you are pretty much using the best practices. While the recent feature that we added, I should say I added, because I'm going to say that it could be buggy. So the recent feature that I added, what it lets you do is you can actually say that, okay, I was running these many applications in my infrastructure, and this is the YAML. Just take it in and give me a pattern file, something that should look like this. That's also something supported, but because that's a direct transposition from your Kubernetes manifest to pattern. So right now there are no best practices that we are doing, basically implementing there. That's one of the caveat. And probably that will also sort of improve later on. But you can be assured that if you're using this construct, we are doing stuff in best way possible. Yeah.
I have a question. In this conversation, first of all, I think this is great. Yeah, great job. I just want to know, when you say enforce, do you mean that like would Measurectl undo? Let's say there's something already deployed in a Kubernetes environment, and then we run like a pattern. Would it undo or would modify existing resources or workload? Like, does it enforce it actually? Like in that meaning of the word?
Okay, so actually, if I got your question correctly,
or could
actually,
we say it enables best practice?
Yeah, actually, it could be, yeah, it could be that enables best practices is more appropriate. Although, yeah, it could be enable. Yeah, we also sort of enforce, that is, some things are which we are sort of opinionated about. Like I shouldn't say we, because it's something that I coded up. So I was opinionated about when I was coding. So let's say when you're doing application, you are actually deploying a rollout, some things happen in a way that are actually which are actually something that I thought would be the best way to get stuff up and running. So let's say you are trying to deploy an application, and Measurectl figures out that this thing already exists. What it's going to do, it's going to gradually lower its count. It's going to increase its count, and it's going to annotate that, okay, I'm the manager from now on. I'm going to manage its feed. So this is something that sort of enforcement. But that's only the case with application, not with most of the construct that comes with patterns. So yeah, mostly it's about enabling best practices.
And well, I think you're kind of right when you say enforce, because if a user decides to adopt Measurectl like as its like tool as to how to deploy and configure his or her workloads, of course, in that sense, it would enforce best practices, like best known practices, like as you say, opinionated, but they're they would be enforced because it wouldn't allow other way of doing it, right? It's like this framework that allows you to use something that someone else, like, or a group of people predefined as a best practice, right? So great, yeah. They didn't like it was just like some thoughts I had, and something else when you say application in this diagram, Kubernetes K8s, like is the file is that file actually encapsulating a Kubernetes environment, or like everything else makes sense, but when I see K8s in the box, I'm thinking like, okay, that this is containing like a Kubernetes. Oh, manifest. Okay,
Yep.
okay, that's better.
Yeah.
Cool. No more questions. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So one confusion from my side. I am seeing like a service mesh pattern repo, and there are sample patterns that we have. So if I see it, so there is like book info pattern or istio filter pattern. So I'm just currently sticking with the book info pattern since yeah. Book info pattern, book info is application, right? So it should it only apply to applications following the similar pattern, like what should I say, if you understand it. So following the similarity, like if I have my application and it is somewhere similar with the way I perform networking inside it, inside my application to the book info application, so only in that case will it be helpful, or it is kind of imposing something like very general that will help like in every application.
Okay, actually, so book info is a application which is made up of multiple services. What right now, what at least let's talk about right now. So right now, the application construct, which I have been also told to rename to rollout. So probably it should be renamed to rollout because it creates a lot of confusion. So right now, the application construct that we have, the practices that it only enforces it on a single construct. So right now, this is that only till here. This is relevant portion. This is the unit on which the practices, the things would be actually enforced. If you want to do anything other than that, let's say, so if you would see this pattern, this is a completely functional pattern. It will actually set up everything in your infrastructure mostly correctly if you have the required things running on your system. Actually, if you don't, then it will also let you know that you don't have this thing running. So we cannot get this pattern up. So let's say if you have everything running, let's say STR is running and you have every CRD in your system. If you apply this pattern, it's almost guaranteed that you will actually have your application available to you on the endpoint that you actually chose. That doesn't mean that we enforce best practices everywhere, at least right now. We enforce best practices on those small units. This is a unit details. We enforce some best practices here. This is a unit. This is not the place where we actually enforced any practice. This is because you actually explicitly chose that, okay, I know what I'm doing. I want to configure my, so this is also something pattern file that lets you do. That is, if you know that you know better about something, then you can go ahead and configure that particular construct. So here you're saying that, okay, I want a virtual service and I want to configure it my way. So you actually explicitly chose that virtual service.stio. I'm going to create a virtual service for it now. There are actually examples where also opting out from creating, yeah. So this is an example where you are actually opting out from one of the practice that actually mesh reinforces for you. So if you are saying that, okay, I want reviews -1 v1, this service, I want it to be up, but you are also saying that, okay, I want to go into the advanced section. I want to opt out from creating services. Don't don't enforce that thing. I'm going to do it on by myself. And there is something basically now this is a unit where we are enforcing lesser practices. We are just basically because you asked us to, and then you can actually go ahead and create service, and probably you may opt out from creating service at all, like completely. So I hope that's making sense. Actually, we are right now we are enforcing best practices on units, not on the entire thing. That's the state right now, actually.
Okay, so those things will be automatically be overridden by the machine, right? By default.
Mhm.
Okay, and this this whole repository is doing that thing, like service mesh patterns. Or is there like any external code?
I couldn't get the last.
Okay, like that is an like idiotic question, so
Okay.
ignore it.
Yeah. So do we have any other questions? Let's assume we don't. We are 12 minutes after, so let's conclude the meeting. Unless someone has anything. Okay, we're good to conclude. So bye guys. Let's meet on Wednesday. We have our development meeting on Wednesday. So good. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Sounds good. Bye, guys. Bye, Crush.
Bye.
So,
Bye.
bye-bye.